What if the most infamous psychopath in television history was never actually a psychopath? Imagine if every awkward interaction, every rehearsed smile, every moment Dexter Morgan spent meticulously studying humans as if they were an alien species, wasn't the cunning mask of a killer, but rather the coping mechanism of someone mislabeled at 7 years old, a label no one ever bothered to re-examine. Today, we're placing Dexter Morgan under the diagnostic microscope. We'll meticulously compare his actions against Robert Hare's psychopathy checklist revised and the DSM-5 criteria for autism spectrum disorder. Drawing from specific scenes in the Showtime series and Jeff Lindsay's novels, and supported by published clinical research, we aim to answer a question the show itself never fully resolved. By the end, you'll understand precisely what Dexter Morgan is, and more importantly, what he isn't. Within the world of the show and Jeff Lindsay's novels, Dexter Morgan is consistently identified as a psychopath. However, this definitive label originated not from a medical professional, but from a homicide detective and a brain doctor who, for their own reasons, needed it to be true. The genesis of this psychopathy diagnosis lies with Hare Morgan. When a 7-year-old Dexter was discovered killing neighborhood animals, Hare, a police officer, not a clinician, concluded his adopted son was an innate psychopath, born with an insatiable need to kill. This single, snap judgment irrevocably altered Dexter's life. Hare then enlisted Dr. Evelyn Vogel, a neuropsychiatrist specializing in psychopaths. Together, they constructed the Code of Hare, founded on the core belief that Dexter's inherent violence was unstoppable, only capable of being redirected towards less harmful targets. In Season 8, Episode 1, A Beautiful Day, Dr. Vogel posits that psychopaths are alpha wolves essential for human survival and societal development. Throughout the season, she consistently praises Dexter as perfect for a psychopath, frequently uses phrases like people like you, and meticulously documents his case as subject zero for a book she intends to publish. Similarly, in Lindsay's 2004 novel, Darkly Dreaming Dexter, the titular character's first-person narration reveals a profound detachment from humanity. He perceives regular people as an entirely distinct species. The literary Dexter is notably colder than his televised counterpart, often expressing genuine shock when he experiences even the faintest flicker of emotion. The novels also depict Hare as unequivocally believing Dexter to be a violent psychopath, thus shaping the code around that assumption. Robert Hare's Psychopathy Checklist Revised, PCLR, is the definitive clinical instrument for assessing psychopathy. It comprises 20 items, each scored from 0 to 2, for a maximum total of 40 points. A score of 30 or higher typically indicates psychopathy. Factor 1 evaluates personality traits such as superficial charm, manipulativeness, emotional flatness, and a lack of guilt or empathy. Factor 2 focuses on behavioral characteristics, including impulsivity, irresponsibility, early behavioral problems, and proneness to boredom. A study published in the Il Moya Journal applied the PCLR to Dexter, in conjunction with Hervey Cleckley's Mask of Sanity framework. Their findings indicated Dexter matched 19 out of 20 traits across both factors, missing only prison escape or parole violation because he was never apprehended. On the surface, 19 out of 20 traits seems like an open and shut case. However, the PCLR was developed by Hare in the 1980s for use with incarcerated individuals and requires administration by a trained mental health professional through a structured interview, corroborated by external records. Scoring a fictional character based solely on on-screen observations lacks the necessary depth and clinical rigor. A more significant issue is that this study interpreted Dexter's external behaviors at face value. Consider his charm. In the first novel, Dexter explicitly states he learned how to be charming, likening it to mastering a card trick. He notes that anyone can feign charm by simply uttering the obvious, stomach-turning things people want to hear. This isn't the effortless, natural charm factor one of the PCLR describes. This is a man who meticulously constructed a social instruction manual because genuine human interaction was incomprehensible to him. There's a profound distinction between someone who instinctively understands people and weaponizes that insight, and someone who had to memorize social scripts just to navigate basic conversation. The psychopath label was hastily applied by a detective making a gut call about a 7-year-old, then reinforced by a researcher who needed Dexter to validate her entire career. The checklist match appears solid until you truly observe how Dexter navigates the social world across 8 seasons and 8 novels. While the psychopathy checklist offers one perspective, Dexter's actual behavior tells a vastly different story. This discrepancy leads us to traits that don't merely poke holes in the psychopath diagnosis, they shatter it completely. Many of Dexter Morgan's fundamental behaviors directly contradict typical psychopathic profiles, yet align perfectly with the official criteria for autism spectrum disorder. The DSM-5 outlines autism spectrum disorder through 2 primary domains. Area A encompasses persistent deficits in social communication and interaction across various contexts, including difficulties with reciprocal social exchange, challenges in interpreting nonverbal cues like body language and facial expressions, and significant struggles in developing and maintaining relationships. Area B describes restricted, repetitive patterns of behavior, interests, or activities, such as rigid adherence to routines, intensely focused interests on specific topics, and repetitive, ritualized behaviors. Let's examine Dexter through this lens. His social struggles are pervasive throughout the series. In Season 1, he fails to grasp the purpose of small talk. He brings donuts to Miami Metro, not out of genuine camaraderie, but because he's deduced it's a social trick to appear friendly. His internal monologue, in both the show and the novels, consistently depicts him observing human behavior with the detached scrutiny of a scientist studying wildlife. He practices appropriate facial expressions and maintains a mental catalog of correct, emotional reactions, referencing it like a cheat sheet. Consider his relationship with Rita Bennett. Dexter intentionally chose Rita because, as a survivor of abuse, she wasn't seeking a physical relationship at the time. He states in both the show and the first novel that he has no interest in sex, presenting this as an intrinsic aspect of his being, not a manipulative ploy. The PCLR, notably, lists promiscuous sexual behavior as a psychopathic trait under Factor 2. Dexter not only lacks this trait but embodies its complete opposite, finding the entire concept draining and perplexing. As astutely observed on his character's Wikipedia talk page, he specifically selected a girlfriend who also had no interest in sex. His rigid, repetitive behaviors are equally revealing. His kill ritual is invariant, the same preparatory steps, the same plastic wrap, tools in identical positions, the same monologue with his victim, the same blood slide taken from the right cheek, and stored in the same box. This goes far beyond mere criminal meticulousness, it strongly resembles what the DSM-5 terms ritualized patterns, where the routine itself holds psychological significance for him. His entire career devoted to blood spatter analysis, a highly specific field pursued for decades, exemplifies the kind of deep, narrow interest frequently observed across the autism spectrum. Dr. Lisa Firestone, a psychologist who contributed to the psychology of Dexter in the Smart Pop series, made a crucial observation. She noted that while Dexter exhibits some psychopath-like traits, his awkwardness in close relationships and his absent sex drive fundamentally contradict the typical personal lives of true psychopaths. She also cited research by psychologist David Farrington, highlighting the risks of labeling a child a psychopath, as normal developmental behaviors, even animal cruelty, can be misinterpreted as permanent psychopathic traits when they are, in fact, transient phases or reactions to underlying issues. Here's the critical point often missed in superficial analyses of Dexter: psychopaths are inherently adept with people. This is precisely the essence of Hare's Factor 1. A psychopath instinctively reads a room, understands social dynamics without effort, and weaponizes this innate comprehension. They don't fumble through conversations, they effortlessly control them. Dexter, in stark contrast, is consistently and painfully inept in social situations. He utterly fails to read a room. When Rita became angry because he didn't display jealousy after their neighbor Elliot kissed her in Season 4, Dexter had to be informed afterward that jealousy was the expected reaction. A true psychopath would have flawlessly feigned the appropriate emotion on the spot, without a second thought. Dexter didn't even recognize the emotion existed until it was pointed out to him. What Dexter actually does, observing others' behaviors, crafting mental scripts, practicing expressions, and deploying memorized responses, is precisely what autism experts define as masking. This is a conscious effort to construct a neurotypical passing persona to navigate a social world that doesn't intuitively make sense. Dexter's entire existence is a performance of masking, a fact he reiterates throughout both the show and the novels. The very traits that led everyone to accept the psychopath label, his apparent lack of visible emotion, social difficulties, strict routines, and hyperfocus, fit the autism spectrum equally well. Conversely, the traits that should definitively rule out a psychopathy diagnosis, his genuine social confusion, complete lack of sex drive, and charm that requires immense effort rather than being natural, were overlooked because everyone in Dexter's orbit had already committed to a label slapped on a frightened child by a police officer. However, acknowledging autistic traits isn't the complete picture. Dexter's profound emotional journey across 8 seasons reveals something no checklist could ever capture, and this journey is where the psychopathy theory entirely collapses. Dexter Morgan's demonstrated capacity for emotional growth throughout the series is fundamentally incompatible with psychopathy, yet aligns perfectly with how individuals on the autism spectrum gradually learn to understand and express their feelings over time. Under Hare's PCLR model, the emotional deficits defining psychopathy, flat affect, lack of empathy, inability to form genuine bonds, are considered inherent, permanent aspects of an individual's personality. They do not improve with time or intervention. Now, let's observe what actually unfolds in the show. In Season 1, Episode 10, Seeing Red, when Rita's abusive ex-husband, Paul, threatens her, Dexter, without conscious planning, strikes Paul with a frying pan. This was a pure, unthinking reflex. Dr. Firestone specifically highlighted this moment in her published analysis as evidence of Dexter displaying protective care, something he adamantly claims he's incapable of feeling. The man who insists he's emotionally empty acted on primal instinct to safeguard someone he supposedly didn't care about. By Season 3, Episode 12, as Dexter is restrained on the Skinner's table, discussing Rita's pregnancy with a vision of Hare, Hare begins to cry. Hare clarifies that these aren't his tears, but Dexter's. Dexter admits he's never felt anything like it before and expresses a desire to live to see his son born. The show portrays this as a significant turning point. From Season 4 onward, after Harrison's birth, the narrative explicitly shows Dexter's human side ceasing to be merely an act. He feeds Harrison, watches over him, and plays with him. He transitions from feigning every emotion to genuinely caring for his family. In Season 5, Episode 1, My Bad, at Rita's funeral following her murder by the Trinity Killer, Dexter reflects that Rita possessed a heart large enough for both of them, admitting he wasn't even human when they first met. His vision of Hare later tells him that killing a man in a blind rage over Rita's death was the first truly human act he'd ever witnessed from Dexter. By Season 8, Dr. Vogel observes that Dexter's worry for Deborah is inconsistent with psychopathy, likening it to Michelangelo attempting to play the banjo. Yet, the show consistently proves her wrong. Dexter repeatedly exhibits emotional reactions that surprise even the expert. In one scene, Vogel scrutinizes him closely and concedes she can discern his genuine distress over what happened to Deborah, adding, with clear confusion, "It's just so unusual." By Dexter, New Blood, the character openly expresses his fear of Harrison rejecting him. He saves strangers out of a genuine desire to help and tells Harrison, "You're all I have." The series portrays this as authentic pain, not an act. This type of profound emotional development simply cannot occur under the medical definition of psychopathy. One does not suddenly acquire empathy at 35 after a lifetime devoid of it. The emotional gaps in Hare's Factor 1 are not merely skills one hasn't yet learned, they stem from fundamental differences in how the brain processes emotions at a basic neurological level, particularly involving the amygdala, which Vogel herself references in Season 8 when discussing psychopathic brains. What can happen, however, is the gradual learning to identify and express emotions that were always present but suppressed or unrecognizable. Research indicates that alexithymia, the difficulty in identifying and verbalizing one's own feelings, affects approximately half of autistic individuals. People with alexithymia do not lack emotions, they lack the capacity to discern what they are feeling. When Dexter repeatedly claims to feel nothing, it may not signify an absence of emotion, but rather a genuine inability to identify his internal states. The show provides a clear traumatic origin for this. Dexter witnessed his mother's murder at just 3 years old and remained in her blood for 2 days. Hare's immediate reaction was to brand young Dexter a psychopath, bestowing upon the child a ready-made identity that foreclosed any possibility of exploring his actual feelings. If Dexter was a traumatized autistic child with alexithymia, Hare's label would have functioned as a psychological trap. Told he couldn't feel, he ceased trying to understand if he could. Told he was a monster, he built his entire life around embodying that role. Dexter's violent acts are not attributable to psychopathy or autism as inherent diagnoses, rather, they are a direct consequence of his profound childhood trauma. Autism spectrum disorder has no medical correlation with hunting down and harming others. Numerous studies consistently demonstrate that autistic individuals are significantly more likely to be victims of violence than perpetrators. Therefore, autism does not explain Dexter's urge to kill. Similarly, psychopathy does not automatically equate to being a killer. Dr. Vogel herself states this in Season 8, noting that psychopaths are found among successful CEOs and powerful politicians. Robert Hare has extensively documented psychopaths who never commit a single crime and thrive in the business world. The FBI's 2008 report, Serial Murder: Multidisciplinary Perspectives for Investigators, identifies childhood trauma as a major contributing factor in the development of a serial killer. Dexter witnessed his mother, Laura Moser, being dismembered with a chainsaw inside a shipping container at the age of 3, subsequently remaining in a pool of her blood for approximately 2 days. His biological brother, Brian, who endured the same horrific event, also grew up to become a serial killer, the infamous ice truck killer in Season 1. In Lindsay's novels, Dexter's stepchildren, Aster and Cody, begin exhibiting violent tendencies after suffering abuse from their biological father, Paul Bennett. Lindsay consistently portrays violence throughout the book series as a consequence of trauma, not an intrinsic feature of any specific condition. The PCLR does not list kills people as a trait, nor does the DSM-5. Violence is an action someone performs, not an inherent state of being. The crucial question isn't which label caused the killing, but which profile best explains every other aspect of Dexter's functioning once the trauma is accounted for. A traumatized child who is a psychopath would exhibit innate social smoothness, natural manipulativeness, early sexual activity, and an emotional flatness that remains immutable. Conversely, a traumatized child on the autism spectrum with alexithymia would be deeply confused by social situations, construct an artificial social mask, develop intense, specific interests, adhere to rigid routines, struggle to identify their own emotions for years before gradually improving, and form genuine bonds that surprise everyone around them, including themselves. Dexter consistently matches this second description throughout the entire series. His killings stem directly from his trauma. The distinctive way Dexter navigates the rest of his life, his social confusion, his masking, his routines, his gradual emotional awakening, originated from something Hare never even considered, having already cemented his belief about his son's nature before any genuinely trained medical professional could intervene. Across both Jeff Lindsay's novels and the Showtime television series, the accumulated evidence overwhelmingly suggests Dexter Morgan is an individual on the autism spectrum, also presenting with alexithymia and severe PTSD, whose violence stems from extreme childhood trauma managed through a code rather than treated by qualified medical professionals. The novels portray a character who governs his entire life through rigid systems, perceives normal human interaction as an alien language, funnels all his focus into one highly specific work skill, exhibits no interest in sex, and progressively unearths an emotional depth he never knew he possessed. In Dexter in the Dark, the third novel, when the dark passenger temporarily abandons him, Dexter experiences sadness and anger as emotions that were suppressed, not entirely absent. The show offers an 8-season emotional odyssey, from complete shutdown to genuine love, grief, fear, and openness. He impulsively protects Rita in Season 1. He accesses fatherly emotions through his vision of Hare in Season 3. He genuinely mourns Rita in Season 5. He fiercely defends Deborah against Dr. Vogel's professional assessment in Season 8. By Dexter, New Blood, he is visibly terrified of his own son rejecting him. Dr. Vogel, the show's resident expert, is repeatedly caught off guard by the depth of Dexter's feelings, ultimately admitting he is not the perfect psychopath she envisioned. The series frames this not as Dexter being wrong about psychopathy, but as Vogel being wrong about Dexter. Dexter Morgan occupies a complex psychological space that medical textbooks have yet to fully categorize. He exhibits genuine psychopath-like features, childhood animal cruelty, the urge to murder, and cold, calculated violence. He also displays undeniable autism-like features, difficulty with social cues, learned masking, rigid routines, deep narrow interests, an absence of sex drive, and alexithymia. Furthermore, he presents significant trauma responses, emotional shutdown, the dark passenger, as an externalization of his urges, and decades of buried feelings. The most accurate clinical assessment would likely involve a diagnosis of complex developmental trauma, interwoven with traits of both antisocial personality disorder and autism spectrum disorder. This intricate profile was severely exacerbated by the fact that he never received appropriate therapeutic intervention when it could have made a difference. Hare was a police officer, not a doctor, who observed a dangerous child and constructed a system based on untested assumptions. Dr. Vogel was a researcher who needed Dexter to be a psychopath to validate her entire career. Neither of them ever paused to consider that the awkward, socially bewildered, routine-obsessed, and emotionally confused boy before them might have been something profoundly different from what they had prematurely decided he was the day they met him. Dexter Morgan was labeled a psychopath by those who required him to be one. The evidence, spanning the novels, 8 seasons, and New Blood, paints a dramatically different picture, that of a traumatized, likely neurodivergent individual whose authentic emotional depth was buried under decades of a misapplied and untested label. He was never the empty monster Hare feared. He was someone denied the chance to understand who he truly was. From the 7-year-old killing animals in the backyard to the grown man terrified of losing his son in New Blood, Dexter Morgan's story is not merely a study in psychopathy. It is a poignant examination of what transpires when the wrong label meets the wrong solution at the most critical juncture, and no one questions whether the word stamped on a traumatized child might have been the very catalyst that forged him into a killer.